All right, everyone, welcome back. We have a very, very special guest, Andy Whyte. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, know who he is. He's the CEO of MEDDICC. It's like having a celebrity on the show, so this is really exciting. And we're gonna get straight into it, like always. We're gonna talk about a problem. We're gonna introduce a problem, and then Andy's gonna walk us through how to solve that problem. And the problem that we're gonna talk about is how a lot of salespeople deal with a lack of stakeholder engagement throughout the sales process and the deal process. So I already have lined up. I already, told Andy we're gonna go really tactical, and he likes tactical. So I'll stay true to the episode as always. We'll put time on the clock for 20 minutes or so, and then we'll take it from there. So I appreciate you joining.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be on. I'm a big fan of yours as well. So I've been digging back into the back catalog and catching up on all good things you do. So
Yeah, I
yeah, great to
appreciate
be
that.
here.
Cool. So let me start with the first question. So when we're saying like stakeholder engagement, how are you defining it? What is like stakeholder engagement?
Yeah. So I mean, it's one of those things that's like, I guess, unlike many thing buzzwords, it's pretty the clues in the name, right? It's engaging with stakeholders. So I guess let's break down a stakeholder, somebody that has a stake in the value that you're bringing to the table. And I think that in itself is kind of a clue to where the opportunity lies because the the who has a stake in what value you have to offer is very much in your hands. One of the things that I've really it's kind of blown me away. I genuinely mean this. I've learned more about sales in like the last 2 years of buying stuff as a buying tech than I have in the previous decades of selling. And the thing that's just blown me away is how little I understand about technology that I'm buying, HR systems, analytical systems, finance systems, that's nothing to do with my expertise. But yet the people that are selling to me assume that I have this high amount of knowledge. And why that's relevant to stakeholder engagement is that if you engage with just the stakeholder that's in front of you and you assume that they are going to understand the full value of your solution outside of even their own interest, you're kidding yourself. So yeah, the answer is that they're not going to know much about what value you bring to them, let alone what value you bring to others around them, other stakeholders in the business. So who has a stake in the value you provide is very much in your hands as a salesperson. So when we think about stakeholder engagement, we're thinking about, okay, well, like what value is it we could bring to this organization? Who's going to have a stake in that value? And then let's work backwards from there about how we can build a plan to engage with those people.
Would you consider end users to be stakeholders? So if someone, I'll use this example. I always like name drop this company, Gong. I'm not affiliated with them, but
Mhm.
you have Gong, who's probably maybe the CRO, RevOps, or VP of sales that's acquiring it for the company. The end users, sure, is that sales leader, but it's also maybe the account executive, the individual contributors. So would a stakeholder also be end users in your opinion?
For sure, for sure. Yeah. And if you think about what we know and love, it's really important in sales is discovery. And if you can engage with stakeholders that are going to be using the platform, find out some pains that they're having that are going to roll up to the people that are buying it, then you're in a really good position. I think one of the things that's very it's an interesting example, Gong, because sales tech, one of the things about selling to sales organizations is that the people you're typically selling to are sales leaders, or like their goals are very similar to the users, right? Their goals
Yeah.
are about like, improving productivity, revenue efficiency, all that kind of stuff. So it's a good engaging with a stakeholder like a salesperson is good because you're going to find out literally what the leaders care about as well.
When do you think it should start? So I mean, obviously the sooner the better, but there's there is an idea of like you don't want to like be premature about it, and that first initial call, and it also let's contextualize it. It depends if we're talking to a prospect that came from an inbound opportunity or some outbound activity. So let's take those scenarios. What if it's inbound versus outbound? When should that like stakeholder engagement start, or like whether it's an end user or whatever it is, and then I'll after that we'll pivot into like how do we actually do it practically.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So I'm a big, big believer in early engagement as early as possible, like genuinely prior, in some cases, prior to you've even met the customer. So whether it's an inbound or outbound, you've got a meeting in the calendar, then the idea is there you should be, if you're a professional salesperson, there's a level of preparation that should go into that meeting well ahead of that meeting, where you are starting to think about who are the stakeholders that are going to be involved in this engagement. And of course, you at this point you're looking from the outside in, so you're not going to know for sure. But
Mm.
what you will have is experience from selling to organizations like that, experience of selling your solution. So you should be able to go, well, I typically sell to this type of person, this type of role. And obviously, all the tools we have today, we can typically find people. And so in that world, I think about it from a perspective of, like, I always say to people, it's like, if I not so much happens so much anymore, but like if I went to meet the customer for that first meeting and I was in the elevator going to the meeting room with the person I'm meeting, and the C-level person, the economic buyer in our world, was in that same elevator. They say, oh, what are you up to, Jenny? It's like, who's this? And they say, oh, this is Andy from MEDDICC, whatever. How ready would I be prepared to talk to that person? Like how, and I think professional salespeople should prepare themselves for those situations where they get onto the Zoom and there's someone there they weren't prepared who could be very senior. So that idea of thinking about, going back to what I said right at the start, think about what every stakeholder's interest would be, because even if two stakeholders have the same pain, the value realization of solving that pain may be different. Like they may have
Mm.
different, um, uh, the value they get might be different, might be realized different. So having those things worked out, I think, is really important. So it starts the preparation, and then the engagement. This is one of the things that I'm a really, really big believer in, which is, I think, a little bit less popular with mainstream sales, but this idea of engaging without an ask. So if let's say I'm meeting you, and there's somebody else I identify as like a key stakeholder, my interest is to open that line of engagement with you, so that should I need to talk to you any further at any later point, I've at least opened that line of communication with you.
So what would be like a friend, like let's just say, like we'll use a lot of salespeople are now like self-sourcing their own pipeline, or SDRs are self-sourcing their a pipeline for the AEs, and they get a prospect on the hook. They've agreed to a discovery call slash demo, whatever you want to call it, with an AE on Monday or Tuesday. What would be your move? What would you do then? So
Yeah.
you've never talked to the prospect yet. SDR
Mhm.
has. Now
Mhm.
but it's on the calendar, and you're only seeing one name on that calendar, and now you're like, all right, I need to make sure. Where do you go from there?
Yeah. So first thing I'm obviously doing is researching the stakeholder I'm meeting. I'm going to be in touch with that person anyway, because if the SDR hasn't, I'm sending over an agenda.
Hmm.
I everyone's got their different processes and things like that. Personally, I would like to be introduced, and then I can start the communication ahead and set the agenda and get what they want from me, all that kind of good practice, best practice stuff. So I'm engaging up front anyway, depending on the type of solution I've got, depending on how the meeting comes about, depends on sort of what sort of questions I might ask, or how, there's I always feel like there's kind of push and pull. If it's like, if the SDRs pulled the meeting and that, it's one of our prospects, but like we made that happen, I'm not gonna like make the meeting seem too heavy. I'm not gonna
Mm.
make them feel like I'm gonna throw loads of questions on them pre-meeting. So I'm gonna be quite like that. I want to make sure that my message comes across like I'm trying to maximize their time, not maximize my chances of selling to them at that point in how I'm perceived. So that's that. I would engage with that person. I'm also then thinking about who else is in who else is in this organization. I'm starting to think about, is the person I'm meeting likely to be a champion? Are they capable of being a champion? And the way that I define a champion is that they have to have power and influence, they have to have a vested interest in my success, and they have to be selling internally for me. So at this point, I have no idea of any of those three things. The last two, very unlikely, unless they know my solution from before. But you can get a feel sometimes for power and influence based on where they sit in the organization, what sort of role they have. But even still, you need to test it. So I'm looking at that, and sometimes you can just rule them out as being a champion. So then I'm thinking, okay, well, you're going to need to try and identify this person at some point. And then the same thing with the economic buyer. So I'm starting to think who the economic buyer is. Now, depending on the type of opportunity, because there'll be lots of people listening to this who have, 3, 4, 5 meetings a day, and this might not be possible as part of their cadence.
Hmm.
But if you're that, if you're looking at a meeting in your calendar and think, you know what, if I can get what I think, if I can bring the value I believe I can bring to that organization, that's going to be my number this quarter. It's going to be that deal. I'm going to be like, you get that feeling, right? Then if I'm approaching an opportunity like that, I'm identifying who I think is the economic buyer, which is in some cases easier than others. If I'm selling if I'm selling advertising technology to the advertising marketing director, then the CMO is a safe bet as an economic buyer in that instance, right? So I'm engaging my manager, or at least maybe my manager's manager, depending on the hierarchy in my organization. I want them to reach out to the economic buyer. I want them to reach out, but I don't want them to like do anything other than introduce themselves and basically just say that we're really excited because we've got this meeting in the calendar. And here's why we're excited, because we've helped this organization that's just like you. And they had these problems that might be just like what you're facing. And here's how great it is. Here's the utopia state that we brought to them. Anyway, all I wanted to do is just open up a line of communication to let you know that if this meeting goes as well as I think it will, then I'll be the executive sponsor for this project. But no ask at the moment. I'll let you. I'll check in with the team after the meeting and let you know how it goes. That way, in my experience of doing that, we've done that a lot. You probably get a reply a third of the time, right? Maybe 25% of the time, a third of the time. And it's never like, oh, great, let's have a meeting. It's always just like, great, thanks for introducing yourself.
Right.
That's not the point. The point is when the deal, if and when the deal progresses further on, it becomes a real opportunity. You have that open line of communication with that potential economic buyer so that when the deal goes sideways, goes a bit south, goes a bit off piste, as they pretty much always will do at some point, there's never a perfect deal, and we potentially need to engage with that person. We're not all sat in that classic salesperson war room scenario with like one person going, "What about this person? Should we write to that person?" And
Mm.
you're on the back foot. You've already got the
Mm.
engagement, and you can, or it's a slightly warmer
So you're
engagement. So
planting the siege with other. So I have a question. Sorry to interrupt. I just have a follow-up
no,
question
it's
to what you're
good.
saying. So let's say you have the call on the calendar. It's with John Doe, who you think is a champion, and based on your research, you're like he may not be the economic buyer. Are you saying that you're going to, for example, like a salesperson will go to their internal executive and have their, let's say, VP reach out
Yep.
to who they think an economic buyer is,
hmm Yeah, I
and
can
just
give
do it?
you an example.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll give you a great example of where this worked, and because it'll tell the full story. So, in my last sales leadership role, unicorn in marketing tech, we were selling to an e-commerce company, and we had a meeting booked. The AE had a meeting booked with the head of e-commerce, head of marketing, which is two great, like for us, that those are potential champions, like no doubt about it. Great meeting. There was a few other people like solution architects on the meeting. We knew we had a solid proposition because we had sold to their that is like it wasn't, but it was like if we'd sold to Nike, we were meeting Adidas, right? It was
Mm.
like that close, and we'd had huge success with Nike in this example, right? So I actually, but a much smaller company, probably about 100 million turnover company. I actually reached out myself in my VP EMEA role to the CEO because that's who we kind of recognized. We didn't actually find anyone else in between
Mm.
head of e-commerce and it was exactly like I said. Got this, Jakey, my team's got this meeting next week with these people in your team. Here's why we're excited, etc., etc.
Mm.
No ask from me, just to let you know. And this person actually did reply, and they said thanks and have a good weekend. The meeting happened. We had a great meeting, right? Brilliant meeting. Next step was they were going to send us their NDA so they could share data so we could start to build business case. All good. Nothing. Nothing at all. No noise, no nothing. Completely ghosted us all of a sudden. And we're like, what? And so all the usual motions that we don't need to go into are taking place. The kind of the follow up, the sort
Hmm.
of soft follow up, the hey, let's send them in an article to try and re-engage them. Nothing. Complete silence, right? And we did that thing. We're like, this is so weird because normally you just think, well, maybe we misread the meeting, but we're like, we know, that feeling where you're like, we can bring so much value to this
Yeah.
organization. There's like one use case would pay for the whole solution 10 times over, and there's 30 of the use cases, right? It's one of those bonkers situations. And so we just had this really strong feeling. And I just thought, well, I've opened that line of communication. I might as well use it. Now, here's where I went a little bit different. And not everyone can do this, but I would implore you to go to this level of attention if you can, which is that I Googled what have they been up to. And I noticed they'd just expanded to America and they'd opened up an office in LA and had this picture of the office. I also knew the CEO was a bit flamboyant. He was like, he's kind of drives a pink Lamborghini, like one
Mm.
of those things. He also I found a picture of him of like those guns that fire dollars. So I like got Photoshop. I put a pink Lamborghini outside the office with him on the bonnet shooting guns in the air to catch his attention in the email. Right, I just needed to, when he opens it up, I needed to make sure he was like, oh, it's not another
Yeah.
sales email. I need to read through this. And it was, and I just literally said, and now you're in a difficult spot because, like, I don't want to throw the people under the bus that have
Yeah.
ghosted us. So I'm playing the whole. I get it. You guys are so busy, but I just wanted to like connect with you, just to like see if basically, I'm saying in the most polite way, we're stunned here. We should be we should you should be like jumping at this chance, but you're not. And hit what's going on. He replied back pretty much straight away, like, "Who did you meet?" So I said who I met. He goes, "Okay, I'm going to introduce you to this other person."
Mm.
And so he introduced us then to the chief customer officer, who, shame on us, we didn't even know existed. Right? This was
Oh,
a in fairness, this person didn't have a LinkedIn profile. It's like they did, but it was like not updated, and they're newish, like 6 months into the role. Anyway, so we get introduced to this new person. This person then reignites the opportunity. Like, we have another meeting. Long story short, the deal closes. Right? We win the deal. It's a great deal. Um, but like, without that email before that pre-connect, I don't think any of that would
yeah.
happen.
So the email that you sent the CEO, you did the whole Photoshop. Did did the email have any text beyond that, or was it just like literally a picture of him with guns blazing?
Mhm. Yeah, no, it did. It kind of said, just to, and sorry, I've missed a bit of the story. I did follow up on my initial email
Hmm.
from the first meeting and said, "Great meeting. It's looking really good, like looking really
Okay.
good." And he replied back to that, "Sounds great." I think he even replied back, "How much will it cost?" And then I sent him like I said, "We haven't got to that bit yet. That's why we need the NDA so we can build the business
Right.
case." So there's a little bit there I missed out, but he was engaged, right? And then so there's like the cut, like I can't remember how long it was, like multiple weeks of nothing, radio silence. And then so my email with the Photoshop in there, and the note was very much like, here's like what like re highlighting what value we can bring. In my first email, I hadn't name dropped the other company. I just said one of your peers in your space. In this email, I dropped their name in because I know that's like dropping like a hand grenade into
Sure.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation. And that, I think, probably had an impact, especially where I'm able to drop in like metrics that they had seen. So I was like, this is what they've seen. And I think that's what like kicked it back to life in his eyes.
Was there an ask in that email that you sent him with the Photoshop, or no ask? It was just like, hey, this is an update.
Yeah, it was an ask. It was an ask to like, is there someone like, I get, it was basically my message was like, undertone was like, I get how busy everyone is.
Hmm.
And I don't like, believe me, I wouldn't follow up like this if I didn't think there was genuine value to offer. So, putting aside how busy everyone else is, given the value, the tremendous value I think is on the table, is there some other way we can kind of move this forward? Kind of, is there someone else
Hmm.
you can introduce me to, something like
Interesting. Have you? I mean, there are so many questions I have.
that?
Did you have the intention, like looking back, do you think it would have been a good idea to even loop in that CEO like earlier on the call, or even on a secondary? I don't know how many calls you did with this particular company, but instead of using them as like a last ditch effort to like see if the deal can move forward, actually bringing them in onto the call itself.
The first call. Um, I think that would have been an ideal. Obviously, we'd love to have people like that involved. I think that what I think you're weighing up in, if we rewind back to that point, what I think we're weighing up is this kind of push. I always say it's like this push and pull, and it's like if you push too hard, on something like that, I think you lose a bit of the dynamic of like, we're like, you expect a CEO to join a call with like some marketing tech when their tech stack is like 50 things big.
Yeah.
I think you can maybe lose a little, I'm not sure what the word is, you lose a little bit of like the dynamic there. Um, whereas like,
It could be premature, right? Like the CEO is like,
yeah,
I'm not getting on the call until like we're at the. I mean, depending on the size of the company, if it's a large enough company, the CEO may never get on the call.
right. Yeah. And I mean, he delegated it to the CCO, and then he got on a call, and yeah, we went from there. I kept that line of communication open. And then something just to mention, because, the bigger picture of engaging with senior people, and I'm sure your audience do this already, but it's just a tip that I, once picked up and I've always kept with me. There's always that difficult dynamic about the whole concept of going around your contact.
Hmm.
Like, if I'm
Hmm.
engaged with someone, even if they're a champion, and I go above them, it's tricky, right? Like, why are you talking around me?
Yep.
And the idea here is like, if you've got a scenario where you're doing that, that you've probably not got a champion, is the first thing to say, because if they're not introducing you to somebody that you think you should be introduced to, that if you think about that concept of a champion, parent influence aside, having a vested interest in your success means that they see that if you win, they win. So they see that your solution is bringing them success, solving a pain they have, bringing them value, and them selling internally for you. So those are the two criteria outside of parent influence. So by nature, if you've got a true champion, they should be introducing you to other people. Now, there are times when they genuinely are like, look, this person is not the right time to meet them. And
Right. It's like too early. Let's wait this out.
yeah, or this person just like doesn't meet people or whatever. Like the
Right.
personality comes in, and you have to trust your intuition there. But you know, that's why it's like so. That's why it's so like emotional intelligence is such an important trait for selling, right? Be able to read the person, what they're telling you, and where you stand with them.
Yeah.
But let's say you are in a situation where your main contact isn't a champion. You either haven't built them up enough yet, or as can be the case sometimes, a person just by their nature is not capable of being a champion, whether it's a parent influence thing or just their personality. And you do need to engage with other people, whether it's someone above them or whether you try and find another champion. A really strong tactic is to praise the person who is your main contact,
Hmm.
right? So if you
Yeah.
say, I've been working with Sarah, she's great. Like what she's been doing so far is brilliant. And I just, and then you can kind of go in. It's quite hard then for them to be kind of really upset at you when, particularly if it's their boss, right? If you said what a great job they're doing.
Yeah, I did that once. I remember. I mean, I did it more than once. But as you were saying, I'm like, oh, I remember I was selling also Martech company software, and that was onto like the VP of marketing. She was sort of unresponsive, but they were really like gung ho, and they had a very specific timeline. And I reached out to the CEO on LinkedIn, like, hey, by the way, I had a fantastic conversation with whatever her name was. We talked about X, Y, Z. That's it. There was actually no call to action. It happened to be like the next day that VP of marketing reached back out. That's I love that.
Yeah.
Last question before we because I have a feeling we're probably gonna do a part two of this because I literally wrote
Yeah.
as you were like talking, I wrote like five questions. We won't have time.
Sure.
Um, this question is like really like chewing at me to ask. What question on the call and or email do you ask to validate if the person is in fact the economic buyer and or the champion? Like, what's the actual question do you ask?
Yeah. Good question. So um, this is a great question to ask for a number of reasons, and it serves this purpose as well. Which is, I'll give a bit of background on this. There's something about if you ask somebody what the process looks like. Like if we, when, what does this process look like? If we work together on this evaluation and it goes well, what does the process look like? There's something about when you ask the person to look forward in a sales scenario where you will get an answer, depending on how into you they are, will depend on the detail you get. But for whatever reason, it doesn't. The quality of that answer is completely miles worse than the opposite of that question, which is ask them this question, which is the last time you bought a solution like this. Can you talk me through the last time you bought a solution like ours? Because what tends to happen with that is it opens up their memory rather than their kind of like, what does our process
Mm,
look like? And you hear all of these little like tidbits of like, well, we have to involve them because they have this thing, and then also, yeah, we have to, have to go. That person will have to be involved, and this and that. And the reason why that's a good question to ask in relation to what you were asking is you'll start to get a real feel for where they sit in the organization. If they start saying, look, the last time, well, let me tell you about a solution like yours, which was ABC. And, what I did then was I did that. And then I built the business case and I went to the CFO and she signed it off. And
mm.
you're like, okay, well, this person probably is a champion, right? But if they're like, well, like the last time it was a nightmare, you know what? We thought we could get it done in 3 months. It took 6 months because, I didn't know it took so long. I didn't, I never bought anything like this before. Then you're like, oh, okay, right. Now it's like a,
Yeah. It's interesting. My like, if I were like listening as an audience member in my head, as you were saying that, I'm like, there is probably like obviously define like what are the definitions of an economic buyer, a champion,
yeah,
etc. But I feel like there's always like these nuanced definitions depending on the company that you work at, and so someone listening to this, as like Andy was saying this, what I'm thinking is like what you should do is you should define what an economic buyer looks like in like your buy like your company industry because it could be very different if you're selling cybersecurity and very different if you're selling Martech.
for sure. Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah,
very
and
cool.
what I'd say on that is it's like the beauty of MEDDICC in this example of stakeholders is it's like the champion example there. Like a champion, if you're selling, transformational software like that's to Fortune 500 companies, that is going to be a very different economic buyer than if you're selling like Sage to small medium businesses, right? But the definition is probably the same. So you just have to apply those same definitions of like the things that you see in the profile
Yeah,
of those different things. So
very cool. Man, I could talk about this all day. I'm for sure gonna. I'm not saying this lightly. I don't say this to everybody. We're probably gonna have a part two of this, and a continuation. But I want to stay true to the time. The 25 or 30 minute blockage of the episode. So, where can people find you? I'm sure they
yeah.
already know where to find you, but just in case nobody's heard of you.
Yeah, for sure. Just LinkedIn, Andy Whyte. It's WHYTE, which is being awkward. But and I just launched a new YouTube channel, which is, I think you just type it's Andy Whyte with an underscore afterwards. Some fiend has got my name without the underscore. But yeah, that's where we're putting a lot of effort into building content at the moment.
Cool, and I'll also put the link in the description.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Andy.
Good. Thank you.